Welcome back to the Biblical Justice Resources Podcast. Last week on the podcast, our guest, Josh Clemens, redirected one of my questions into what we might describe as a more theologically accurate direction. I don't know if he realized it at the time, but along with redirecting the question, he was also helping to redirect me personally through his response. As it happened, it brought to mind another time that a previous podcast guest offered a correction and redirection to something I had said and to my understanding of how we are to approach justice. I want to bring these corrections to our discussion today, not only to better understand what they each were and why they are important, but why remaining open to correction and redirection helps us grow in our ability to pursue justice and to pursue God and His kingdom. Now, if you will, join me for a conversation about some of my own personal growth experiences. My name's Eric, and this is the Biblical Justice Resources Podcast. Our conversation will begin right after this. The Biblical Justice Resources Podcast is supported by listeners like you at patreon.com/biblicaljusticeresources. If you're interested in supporting the podcast and helping to resource individuals and the church for the pursuit of biblical justice, please consider giving today at patreon.com/biblicaljusticeresources. Again, visit patreon.com/biblicaljusticeresources to help support the podcast. Now on with the show. If you listened to the conversation with Dr. Greg Coles in episode 12, you may remember me using a phrase I got from one of my theology professors. What we say and how we say it matters. You'll remember that we discussed how thinking about language and semantics isn't a place we should live, but taking some time to think about how we talk about something can help us expand our perspective, further our understanding, and even reorient us as necessary. As I mentioned in the open, this just happened to me last week during the episode with Josh Clemens. But I actually want to start with a different story today. A story about how what I said was accurate, but also limited my understanding of what we're called to as Christians when it comes to understanding justice as part of our discipleship and God's character. This first story comes from a conversation I had with a previous guest, Dr. Chris Brooks. About a year and a half before our podcast episode, Chris and I had a conversation where I expressed my desire to do justice work, maybe even to the point of saying that I wanted to focus on justice work. This is technically correct. I would like to devote my vocational life to the work of justice, and I've spent a good part of my work life in angst because jobs I was in weren't focused on that goal. But Chris offered me a correction in the moment that not only reoriented me personally, it shaped the vision for Biblical Justice Resources. He expressed that the goal is not for Christians to do justice work, but to become a people of justice. When we focus only on the work of justice, it can become easy to fall away from the work because it isn't necessarily rooted in anything. But when we understand justice as a core part of the gospel, of our discipleship and our identity, we cannot help but pursue justice because it is part of who we are as a people. I walked away feeling like that was a significant correction. So much so that when I started the Biblical Justice Resources website, I used the language of resourcing Christians for the pursuit of biblical justice rather than the work of biblical justice. A conversation could still be had about whether that's the best phrasing, but it felt at least a step closer to the idea. But in the moment, I was reminded of learning about political advocacy, and how the way to build partnerships is not around a bill or piece of legislation, where the partnership dies if the legislation dies, but around a more foundational ideal, one that we can continue to rally around even after a specific piece of legislation has come and gone. But theologically speaking, it was a reminder of the character of God and who we are called to be as His people. As Josh said last week, Jesus is about justice, and justice is about Jesus. And the church should be about both of those things. In some ways, the reason I went to seminary was to determine if that was true. It turns out it is. How, you might ask, was this a reorientation? It's because what we do flows out of who we are. If we get so focused on what we do, we can forget who we are supposed to be. I could talk at length about what I've seen from a career perspective, how we can get stuck focused on what we do out of a need to generate an income without being able to figure out who we are. Or I could go in depth on the idea that we are human beings and not human doings. Both of those are true, by the way, so don't take them as throwaway comments about unimportant ideas. But what I want to do now is bring us to the redirection I got from Josh last week. Towards the end of the conversation, I asked Josh if he felt like what One Race is doing has been working, and that people have been changing. On its face, this question isn't necessarily wrong. The question after talked about different initiatives and actions from One Race that had and hadn't worked. But the correction he offered is a reminder of what our goal is and what our work is, not only in our pursuit of justice, but in our walk as Christians. I could recount the entirety of this part of the conversation, but we actually have a clip available for this one. So I want to play you the clip, and I want you to listen to where he takes his response to the question. I'm not entirely sure how to phrase this next question, so have a little grace with me as I get through it. But do you feel like maybe the most glib way to say this is, do you feel like it's working in Atlanta? But like, do you feel like the churches that you work with are in a different place now than they were in 2016 in a direction that you would hope that they're moving? Or is it more complicated than that?
I think it's I think the question has to be phrased differently.
Yeah.
I was with my friend and mentor Crawford Loretz, and I was making some kind of grand statement about feeling like I'm the only one. And he just redirected me. Um, you're not the only one. That is actually a low view of God. So you mean to
Yeah.
tell me that God is ineffectual in his doing, that he isn't going to accomplish that which he set out to accomplish? Now I remember Paul saying, no, 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 he's able to will and to do that which is his good pleasure, that the Lord is able to accomplish what he set out to accomplish. I think that we have got to get okay with mystery, that some plant and some water, but ultimately it's God who gives the increase. And so we just got to be faithful in the scattering of seed, faithful in the watering of seed, and faithful to the fact that it is the Lord's project. It's not my job. These are not my people. I can't make people something. It's not my job. That's you. Make them the desire of your heart. Second that I get in the business of trying to make people, I step into the role of lordship, and that's not my spot. That's his spot. No, I'm going to scatter and I'm going to water. What that looks like with One Race is that we provide the opportunity. We provide the opportunity through our cohorts, through our Southern Justice experience, through our large events. We prepare a table for all to come and dine. We constantly encourage, and I think about that as the water, right? We're watering the seed by continuously providing opportunities and encouragement along the journey. This is the work. It is to persist in that way, right? And to leave the consequences to the Lord. Like, this is your doing, this is your project. You have to do something with us.
So, what did you hear? If you want a moment to think or replay the clip, you can do that now before I offer my thoughts. What I heard in the moment, the reason we're talking about this today, was a reminder of whose work this is. I'm struck listening back by the question he recounted from Crawford Loretz. Do you mean to tell me God is ineffectual in his doing? It was a reminder, as Josh noted, to think about our view of God. Do we have a low view or a high view of what he is able to accomplish? But along with that, it's a reminder of whose work this is, and a reminder of my conversation with Chris Brooks. It's not just that we can get stuck focusing on doing rather than being. We can get stuck focused on the wrong person's work. As Josh said, our work is to remain faithful to the scattering of seed, the watering of seed, and the fact that it's the Lord's project. This doesn't mean we don't do the work we think of as justice work. We are still called to care for the poor, widow, orphan, and migrant. We are called to care for the least of these, a care which is demonstrated not only by feeling but by action. But the ultimate change is not of our making. And again, as has been true at various points throughout the podcast, this isn't just an admonishment for you, the listener. This is real-time refining for me as a person as well, as a follower of Christ. Our work is to exist in the presence of God, to be His people, and to reflect His character. All else flows from that. Thank you for listening to the Biblical Justice Resources Podcast. This podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Eric Beck. To learn more about how you can be resourced for the pursuit of biblical justice, visit our website at biblicaljusticeresources.com.